In this session, we're talking about forgiveness and healing. That's an interesting title. Why did I put those two together? There's a clue in there, that the two are related. One leads to the other. And we talk about that in this session, and I'll give you some insights into that here as well. But let's talk about forgiveness and maybe the opposite of forgiveness, which is not forgiving, holding on to the hurt, holding on to the anger, holding on to the bitterness, and what that can do for you. So I was giving this workshop one time to divorced Catholics, and it was a small enough workshop where I was able to go around the room and have each person introduce themselves and give just a small snapshot of why they were there. And it was just simply their name, what parish they went to, whether they were separated or divorced, how long they had been divorced. That was pretty much it, if they had any kids. So I was going around the room and came to this one woman who was an older woman. She looked to be retired. And she started to explain her situation and how long she had been married. And then she started talking about her divorce. And the more she talked about it, the more angry she became. And she was so animated in her explanation that I thought she was going through a divorce, or she had just recently been divorced. So I asked her, I said, well, how long have you been divorced? And she said 30 years. 30 years. She had been holding on to that bitterness and that anger for 30 years. And you know what? Those lines were etched on her face. You could see it in her physically, that she'd been carrying around this anger, and she was bitter over it. And you could tell. Well, I know that none of us want to be in that place. That I'm sure that none of you want to be angry and bitter 30 years from now over your divorce. When you don't forgive, you become bitter. When you don't forgive, it's like you drive a stake in the ground and anchor yourself in your divorce, and you can't move forward. You're tethered to that anger. You're tethered to your divorce. That divorce has now defined your life. And that's why forgiveness is so essential in your healing. When you forgive, you cut the rope. You set yourself free. And that's why it's so essential to forgive. Now, a few thoughts I want to share with you. First and foremost, remember that forgiveness is a process. It doesn't happen overnight. It's not, an automatic type of thing for most people. For most people, it takes time to forgive, and it's a step-by-step process. And so, what I suggest is that you start with forgiving the intention if you can't forgive the action. And that's Saint Bernard who said that and suggested that. And I think it's very wise, because it begins you moving forward into the forgiveness process. Because when you really step back and look at it, most people don't intentionally set out to hurt you. Even your former spouse, if they hurt you, they were probably only thinking of themselves. They weren't really thinking about you and intentionally trying to hurt you. They were doing whatever they were doing, and as a consequence, it hurt you. So if you can look at it from that perspective and realize that they didn't intend to hurt you, you can then begin to forgive the intention. And then that ultimately leads to forgiving the action. Now, I remember one time after my divorce, this was the first year after my divorce, I had heard about the need to forgive, and I was on a retreat. And I figured this is a great time for me to forgive my former spouse. So I go into the chapel, I have my journal, and I was planning to write her a forgiveness letter. And basically tell her I forgive you for everything you've done to me, all the pain you brought into my life, and so on and so forth. And so I began to write this letter. And as I was writing this letter and telling her, that I forgive her, and, that, wow, what you did to me was really painful, and I forgive you. But the more I wrote, the more angry I became. And then the letter turned into this letter of anger at her. And I had to stop because I realized that I was not ready to forgive. As much as my head wanted to forgive, my heart was not ready. And the two are connected in the forgiveness process. Forgiveness starts with your head. It starts with a decision to forgive. Okay? And then ultimately, when you pray for the grace, because it does require supernatural grace, you pray for the grace and it allows your heart to forgive, and it really ultimately allows you to let go of that pain, let go of any animosity you might have towards that person. And our Lord underscores the need for us to forgive. Peter asked him, Lord, how often am I required to forgive? And he said 7 times 70. Well, that's an interesting number because that seems like that's a finite number of times. Pretty big number, right? What's that, 490? You know, what in the ancient times, 7 was the perfect number. It represented perfection. And so 7 times 70 is really like saying infinity. Okay, so our Lord is saying we must always forgive. We must always be willing to forgive. And that also includes we must always work on forgiveness. So this person that's hurt you, this person that has caused all this pain in your life and maybe even your kids' lives, you are called to forgive them. And you know, it's a process. It's not going to happen overnight. It may take you a fair amount of time. But what our Lord expects of you is that you work on it every day. That every day in some way, you at least pray for the grace to forgive and you start working on the process of forgiving. Now, the other thing I want you to know is that forgiveness really is for you. Okay? It's not so much for the other person. The other person may not even be aware you've forgiven them. They may not even accept your forgiveness. They may not even be sorry for what they did. Doesn't matter. Okay, this forgiveness is really about you letting go of the anger and the hurt and the pain and the justice or the judgment towards them. It's not your job to administer justice. That's our Lord's job. So when we forgive, we let go of our right to the justice, and we just trust in our Lord for that. Okay, so the inspiration I've included in this session is called Freedom, and it's about a true story about someone who was in my Recovering from Divorce group, and they were saying, you know what, I'm not going to forgive my former spouse because he's not sorry. So this woman felt like that, you know, she wasn't required to forgive because he wasn't sorry. And it's like, no, you're missing the point. The forgiveness is not for him at all. The forgiveness is for you. Okay? And that's true for you as well. That this process of forgiveness is for your healing. Okay? So what I challenge you to do is to begin praying for the graces to forgive. Now, I know when I talk about this topic, some people get very angry. They're like, you know, I can't believe I'm required to forgive. You know, of all the things this person did to me, they don't deserve my forgiveness. And that just clearly signals that they're not ready. Okay, but we're still called to forgive. So at a minimum, you're called to pray for the grace to forgive. So if you're angry still at your former spouse, if you're at that place that you're not ready to forgive, then I'm just asking you to start praying for the grace every day to forgive. And you may have to pray for that grace for quite a while. But I assure you, our Lord will grant you the graces that you need. And here's the other key insight that you need to really understand, is that you will not heal completely from your divorce until you forgive completely. Okay? So your healing is based on your forgiveness. Okay, so if you want to heal completely, if you want to move forward and not have your divorce define you, then work on your forgiveness. Work and ask for the graces to completely let go, to completely forgive. And our Lord will grant you those graces. And I assure you, you will begin to live the abundant life free of the anger and bitterness of divorce. I hope that helps. God bless you.